everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today to our ongoing series around wolves in Colorado. I'm Kristan Uhlenbrock. I'm the director of the Institute for Science and Policy, a project here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I'm thrilled to be bringing you another episode in this long-going series that we've been doing to try to stay informed and updated around the reintroduction plan of wolves here in Colorado. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge with respect that I and my guests today reside in traditional lands of 48 Native American tribes who now live throughout the American Southwest, Great Plains, and Rocky Mountains, including the Southern Ute, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Apache, the Comanche, and the Shoshone tribes. I also want to acknowledge and thank my co-host and partner in this series, the Center for Collaborative Conservation out of CSU, Colorado State University. Together, John and I have been working side by side since early 2020, back when the ballot initiative was about here in November of 2022, where Colorado voters decided on Proposition 114 about whether or not to reintroduce wolves into Colorado. That passed for those of you who've been following along with that series. If you're looking for some of that background information about how we got here, I highly recommend going and checking out some of those videos and resources and articles that we pulled together that talked us through that process. We took a lens looking at science. We took the lens looking at the policy, the human lived experience, and what it means to potentially reintroduce wolves here into the landscape. Since then, we have brought you a kind of an after the vote series, and now here we are in 2023, where there is a draft plan that is now open for public comment through February 22nd or 23rd. I'm going to let my folks here correct me on the exact date of when public comment is due on the draft reintroduction plan. But today's episode is really focused in not just on that plan and the details within it. It's pretty long, it's extensive, it's available. We encourage you to read it. But I'm really excited more to talk about that process of how we got here and how we as a state, with our Stakeholder Advisory Group and many other engagement processes, came up with a plan where there was consensus building, where the idea of bridging and overcoming difference of opinions. And so this is really about some of that personal hard work that takes when you need to make compromise and when things need to be negotiated, following obviously the law that passed. So I'm excited to dive into that. If you're looking for a lot of detailed specifics about that, we'll touch on some of those. We absolutely will touch on some of these wicked hard issues within the plan. But like I said, I encourage you to definitely go and check out that draft plan. If you have any questions or comments or chats for us and you're joining us here on the Zoom, you can open up that chat feature. You may have heard Nicole ask you, let us know where you're watching from. We love to see where people are tuned in from. You can drop some questions into that chat today. This is going to be a conversation that we have. We'll do our best to work in some of these questions through the conversation, but believe me, we have so many, we often don't get to all of them. So my sincere apologies in advance if we don't get to any of your questions that you all have, but we love to see them. It absolutely helps inform our programming. So definitely stay engaged in the chat with us today. If you're watching on any of our other social media platforms, the same thing in the comments and the chat section, just kind of keep your eyes on that. So let me bring my colleague and friend and collaborator, John Sanderson, with me today. John, thank you so much for coming back and for hosting this conversation with me. Welcome. Do you want to say a little bit about who you are and who you work for and introduce our guests?
Yeah, sure. My name is John Sanderson. I am the director of the Center for Collaborative Conservation at CSU at Colorado State University, as Kristan said. Really want to welcome all of you today. Thank you for taking time out of your Monday to engage on this important issue. And thanks for the interest and time you're dedicating to this issue generally. As Kristan mentioned, I'm particularly interested in the process of how we navigate challenging issues and how we work together, how we collaborate around tricky conservation issues. And we're going to focus on that the theme of common ground in this dialogue, but inevitably, even when trying to find that common ground, we have to deal with some sticky issues. And so we will be talking about some of those sticky issues today as well. We have three guests with us today. We have Reid DeWalt, who works for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Reid was born and raised in Buena Vista, Colorado, or near Buena Vista, or maybe he says Buena Vista. as some folks do down there. Reid attended Colorado State University, where I currently sit, and after a variety of positions at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, he is now the Assistant Director for Wildlife and Natural Resources. And Reid has been engaged with Proposition 114 from the very beginning of it emerging as a proposition and then getting passed in 2020. Welcome, Reid.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Kristan, as well. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on your panel today.
Thank you, Reid. Our next guest is Bob Chastain, and Bob is a member of the Wolf Stakeholder Advisory Group. And maybe, Bob, when I get to you in a minute, you can share a little bit about what that is. And Bob has been with the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo in Colorado Springs, Colorado, since 1995. He joined the zoo as curator of horticulture, and then he had several additional responsibilities added to his plate over a decade or so. And he has been president and CEO of Cheyenne Mountain Zoo since 2005. Welcome, Bob.
Hi, John. Thank you. Appreciate the introduction. And I just wanted to say one of the things that I was excited about the Stakeholder Advisory Group was getting to know the diverse group of people that was on that group. You're going to hear a little bit about Renee. I heard about how fantastic she was throughout the process. And part of that was just a reminder that we're all coming from really different backgrounds, and people aren't always who you think. So thanks for having me today. I'm excited about the conversation and appreciate the message you're trying to get out.
Yeah, sure thing, Bob. Yeah, one thing I'm really curious about is stereotypes, because that's really easy to make in a big diverse society, but we'll get to that in a second. Yeah. Our third guest is Renee Deal, also a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Group. Renee is from Somerset, Colorado, near the headwaters of the North Fork of the Gunnison River in western Colorado. And Renee actually left Somerset to work as a biomedical engineer in Boulder and Arvada for about 10 years, and then decided to return to her family's sheep ranch. And Renee has spent about 15 years teaching preschool and secondary math, while also being while also working her sheep ranch, and now she works on the sheep ranch full time. Welcome, Renee.
Hi, everyone. Hi, John and Kristan. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspectives.
Excellent. Thank you all for being here. Reid, let me start with you. I want to ask you a three-part question. The first is, can you remind us what Proposition 114 is? And then what process did the agency follow, your agency as the lead agency on Prop 114? What process did you all choose to follow, and why? And then lastly, if you could give us a brief overview of the key elements of the plan.
Yeah, thank you, John. And you may need to remind me of those, but I think I'll remember. So as I think most folks know, Proposition 114 was voted on November 3rd in 2020. Seems like just yesterday at some points, but that proposition, which is now state law, it directs our Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission to develop a plan to restore and manage gray wolves in Colorado by December of 23. So our time is quickly approaching. So 114 requires a couple things within it, and I'm going to give a broad overview. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but I do have the broad aspects of it. So the first thing that we did was hold statewide hearings to acquire information in developing the plan. And it was 2 summers ago that we held over 40 meetings across the state to acquire information from the public about that. And we did those in person and virtually. And that was during the time of COVID. And that was a pretty big feat for everybody to attend those and to be part of that. It also requires us to develop a plan, 1, to restore gray wolves, and then 2 is to manage. So it's a restoration and management plan. And that was to take place, or that is to take place on the western slope of Colorado. There's also reporting requirements that are in the plan and an annual update to the legislature, the General Assembly, of how the project is going and the restoration and anything that is of interest to the General Assembly at that time. I talked about wolves being introduced by December of 23. And so that's a definite end date or for wolves to be on the ground. And then a couple other things that it generally requires is to see that for the commission, thus CPW, to oversee the restoration and management of wolves. And that includes the distribution of state funds to be available for the prevention and control of damage to livestock. So prevention and then compensation as well to livestock producers. And then we continue to update that plan and to continue to get information to continue to adapt that plan and to develop it as we learn more about wolves in Colorado. So that is the majority of 114. There are some specifics within there, but that's really the large majority of what that requires. And John, remind me of your second one. Was it the major elements of the plan? Was that?
Yeah. You have a section in the plan that's called key elements of the plan. What are the key elements?
Yeah, and thank you for that, John. As we looked at that, we really broke down the process into what we considered 4 key elements. So one is what we consider our restoration logistics. And so that's really like, how are we going to do this? A lot of that, and you'll see it in the plan, is what we kind of call the nuts and bolts of how would we get the wolves? Where would they come from? How would we treat the wolves? Those type of things, basically how to get them here, locations, those type of things, really the day-to-day of how to actually do the project. Another part that we consider a major element is what's called impact-based management. And that the theory behind that is wolves, if that are not having an impact, should be allowed to do what they naturally do, and all the benefits that come with them should be allowed to happen. And so when there's an impact, that would be our management philosophy, is to manage that impact. And there's a whole ways of doing that. And I would encourage folks to look at that plan to see all the ways that we would manage those impacts. The third part that we really focused on as well is that prevention and then compensation plan for livestock producers. So one, prevention of damage to livestock, taking of livestock or anything like that. And then that compensation piece to producers if there are damages or losses to livestock. And that was a major part of the plan, and one the commission continues to really talk about. And then the fourth thing we really focused on throughout the process was the education and outreach about wolves in Colorado. It's a species being restored to the state, and one that folks are very interested in, and how would we educate the public about that, and then the outreach we would have to just the state in general. And we started that, and we continue to look for how we're going to educate and outreach, and seminars like this are a prime example of how we intend to do that going forward. And then the third was the process. Is that right, John?
Yeah, just a little bit about the process and why you followed the process you did.
Yeah, so obviously it's a huge undertaking, lots of interest across the state, and even nationally and internationally. It's a big deal. It's the first time a voter-led initiative like this has happened. Our intent was to get it right, and so what we really wanted to do was start off with those public input meetings, over 40 meetings I talked about. But then a key part of the planning process has been the creation of a stakeholder advisory group, and then a technical working group. And so the stakeholder advisory group, which you have 2 members of on today, was really to gather the diverse set of voices from across the state, from all kinds of people that are interested in wolves, from those who really want to see wolves on the ground and restored to Colorado, to those who have concerns about it and may not want to see that happen, and the whole spectrum in between. We also had county commissioners on the stakeholder advisory group. We had those who are in the ranching business, outfitting business. We had conservationists and folks that definitely like wolves and want to see them restored. So we saw a whole wide range of folks on that stakeholder advisory group. We also had a technical working group, and that was more made up of scientific experts on the technical aspects of wolf management, those who have done it before. We really relied on folks from the Northern Rocky Mountains in the Yellowstone area and the states of Montana, and we also had a representative from Oregon on there. And then we had a lot of the federal agencies represented, as well as there's federal agency impact. So that was really to help us build some of the science around the plan and to give those inputs. Those groups met for over 15 months. We concluded that last summer. And then those inputs from both those groups, we put into the creation of the plan that is out there for comments, and that's our draft plan. So once we did that, we presented that plan on December 9th to our commission. There's actually on our YouTube page, CPW's YouTube page, there's a 4-hour presentation for folks to look at if they would like to see that. It really goes in depth of that plan. And then we've kicked off a series of 5 meetings. We've just had the 3rd one in Rifle last week. We have one this week. It's a virtual meeting, and it's Thursday from 5:30 to 8:30, and folks can see that on our YouTube channel. And then we have one February 22nd, and that's really the last meeting with our commission to hear public input, and then our commission to direct us as to what they want to see in the plan. We'll take, after we get all that input, we'll take that back and go to, in the month of March, my staff will go back and we'll kind of redline the plan, and then we'll present it again to the commission for hopefully final adoption. We'll have a meeting in April, and then we'll have one in May, and hopefully there's a vote in May where the commission approves the plan, and then we can get on with the business of actually getting the wolves, the physical wolves, and releasing them in December. So that's a lot in there, and there's a lot of different things. I would encourage people to go to our wolfengagement.co.org website to really look at all that information. There's way more detail. So I'll stop there, John. I know you have other things to get to, but thank you.
Yeah, I'm a 4-hour presentation where we've only got 60 minutes total here, so there's a lot to cover, obviously. Bob, let me turn over to you, and I would love it if you would share a little bit more about who you are and the work that you do. And then tell us, if you would, why you applied to be part of the Stakeholder Advisory Group.
Yeah, just rather than do another introduction of myself, let me tell you a little bit about the zoo, because it's relevant to the conversation. Then I'll tell you about why I decided to join the Stakeholder Group. So acknowledge up front that there's lots of different opinions about zoos and aquariums, but if you would think about some of the things that I'm going to tell you, hopefully you would acknowledge that we do have a place in conservation, and we're playing a part in that. First, the zoo has, in Cheyenne Mountain Zoo here, we have 800,000 people come to the zoo every year. That's been growing over the last 20 years from about 350,000 people. So not insignificant in terms of the growth that we're having. People do want to have a connection with wildlife and wild places, and we provide a place to do that. Then we have about 20,000 member households as well. So again, people join and their families join and come to the zoo. But we have this big commitment to make your visit to the zoo actually help conservation in the field. We do that through a lot of ways, but one way is a Quarters for Conservation program, where we take a portion of your revenue, your admission into the zoo, and we apply it directly to field conservation. I'm not talking about taking care of our animals here. I'm talking about people who are actually working in multiple countries. And we raise about every 18 months, we raise about $1 million for that. That program has raised over $4 million since we started it. We currently breed 2 endangered species, the black-footed ferret and the Wyoming toad, for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We've traveled to and done work in Ecuador and Indonesia, Panama, Kenya, all places where we regularly work now. We're a small zoo from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums standpoint, but we were ranked recently 3rd in USA Today on the top 10 zoos in the United States. So we have a good reputation for that. And then we also are home to Mexican gray wolves here that were part of the reintroduction process many years ago. We've been involved with that. I say all that to say we're centered in an urban area. We do care about this balance between rural and urban. We care about the intrinsic value of wildlife, but the way in which we try to do that is to make sure we can bring people along and they don't have to agree with us on everything. When it came time to think about whether wolves should be involved in Colorado, we put, after considerable thought, we decided that we would help gather signatures. We gathered over 15,000 signatures to help get wolves on the ballot, and then another 1,700 signatures from non-registered voters. Of course, they weren't counted, but to do that, we also gathered signatures from people who were against the reintroduction of wolves so that we could get a sense of what was going on. The reason then I joined the Stakeholder Advisory Group is their early polling showed that Colorado is ready for wolves to be reintroduced, and we had been waiting for that time for the culture to sort of be ready for that. That's why we got involved in signature gathering. When the vote was done, as we know, it was very split, and we felt like we were, I don't know whether it was sad or disappointed or whatever, that Colorado was still so split on the issue. So it was at that point we committed to trying to tell the truth the best we could through the entire process, understand both sides. That's where I met some amazing people like Renee, who has a diverse background, which you heard. So really, we just wanted to see if we could take a crack at acknowledging that wildlife has intrinsic value, but the ranching community and private lands matters to wildlife, and we wanted to marry those. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Bob. Renee, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself or anything I missed? And then why did you want to be on the Stakeholder Advisory Group?
Yeah, thank you, John. So you kind of summed me up a little bit. I have a pretty diverse background. I've had about 3 careers in my lifetime. Ranching is really important to me and my family. My great-grandfather started raising cattle in 1928. We were part of the first, one of the first grazing permits in Gunnison National Forest here from the Taylor Grazing Act in 1934. We've had that same permit since. It was a cattle permit. We converted to sheep in about 1976. And we take very seriously our role in responsibly managing that rangeland forest area. So fast forward, I'm the 4th generation, and I made a commitment to come back and kind of help out on the ranch and try to advance our ranching heritage and, kind of grow and change with the different tides going on. As far as why I applied to be on the stakeholder group, I think for one, sheep ranchers kind of they're kind of a postscript right down in the bottom. You hear a lot about cattle and cattle ranching and the effects on cattle, when in reality, sheep are more vulnerable and susceptible to predation. And we already have high levels of predation with other animals. And so I thought it was really important that we had representatives from the sheep industry. And I really appreciate that CPW recognized that and allowed me to have a seat to be a voice for the sheep industry. I also, like Bob, was, people in my industry were not real excited about the proposition passing, but I was actually surprised that it was so slim, and it was almost like a gut punch that it was so close, because that also flagged to me that this is really going to be contentious. And I'm an educator also, and so it's really important to me for people to understand the different sides of the issue. And it's also really important to recognize that there is that urban and rural divide that we talk about. And that divide can only be closed through education and outreach. And it was important for me to commit myself to helping not only share my voice as a sheep rancher, but to also help people understand the kinds of issues that we'll be dealing with. And it becomes really, it's really personal and emotional for me. And it put me way outside my comfort zone, because I do have a little bit of a social anxiety, but it was a great learning experience. So that's, I want to be part of the solution. I didn't want to be part of the loud, angry voices. I wanted to be part of helping come up with workable solutions. So that's why I joined. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. I want to actually pick right back up, maybe and start with you, Renee, and go around to Bob too, a little bit more about this group coming together, because there's something really unique and special, not only about establishing this group and the important advisory role it had, but I could hear that emotion already coming from you, because this is a very passionate topic, right? That is the one thing over and over. You all live in this world, but from someone on the outside, every time I talk about this or think about it, or I go to this part of the state and want to talk about something else, and people want to talk about wolves with me. And so this emotion and the passion that this brings means that comes with you when you join the Stakeholder Advisory Group, right? We've got this proposition that passed. We have this charge as a state, as CPOW has to do, and you all had to show up this table of a diverse set of stakeholders with stereotypes that you potentially brought in of each other, right? Of the positions that people would hold. And so I'd be really curious, Renee, if you want to start, and Bob, if you want to pick up on this too, like, how did you even start to begin building those relationships? Because what I've been hearing is this working relationship that ended up happening across some people in the Stakeholder Advisory Group was such a useful way for this process to unfold. And so I would love to hear some of those stories or examples, or where you even started to build those relationships, and thinking about that through the lens of stereotypes that were part of that conversation from the very beginning. How did you get past some of them?
Yeah, I remember walking into that first meeting and just being like, oh my gosh, how am I going to, and then listening to all the introductions, and I had read all the bios of everyone who was on the group beforehand. And I was very skeptical, to be honest, that we were going to be able to accomplish much, because I knew we were coming from really disparate, viewpoints. And so and they started out asking like pretty basic questions, like what's our goal here? How do we see, how can we see, how would we see this as a, what am I trying to say? How would we see this as a success? And so that was really interesting, because, immediately we came out with our, I think a lot of us came onto the group really motivated to like, make sure that you hear me, kind of an attitude. And so that was hard to temper. And I think we also came to it going, let's get some work done like right away. And it took me a little while to realize that we weren't going to get anything done until we did build those relationships. And at first I was like not buying into that. I was like, nope, we just need to get some work done. Come on, it's taking forever. Like the first 3 meetings felt like we got nothing done. And then I started to realize that the whole process was about building those relationships and breaking down those stereotypes, and like getting to know people on a personal level. Because behind every person who has a really strong viewpoint is a personal, has a personal story as to why they have those viewpoints. And so it was important to kind of break down those walls. And I think really what started those positive relationships, in my opinion, was when John Howard, who lives in Grand Junction, when we had our Grand Junction meeting, he had like a get together before the meeting at his house, and he invited all of us to his house and barbecue chicken. And we were just able to just visit with each other as people outside of the group. And that was so valuable. And CPW picked up on the fact that was really valuable. So then they started organizing the dinners outside of the meetings so that we could really help. And we're just talking about like our kids and our hobbies. And, I made it a point to go talk to people and approach people and ask them really, really like questions about their personal life and how many kids do you have, and they play sports, and what's your favorite hobby or whatever, rather than focusing on constantly talking about the wolf issue, you know, and I think that was really important for us to all kind of see that there's real people with real feelings behind all of that. And that helped build that first step so that then we could have respectful conversations with each other in these meetings. And that got hard. We had a few contentious moments, you know, because it really is hard to see somebody else's viewpoint when it is so far different than your own. But it was important to keep an open mind about all that. So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, from my perspective, our organization's currently reading a book by Renee Brown, Dare to Lead. And there's a quote in there is one of the things that she learned is people are people. And so you realize pretty quickly on the Stakeholder Advisory Group, while clearly we voted, some of us voted yes and some of us voted no, that wolves should not be introduced. We were a whole bunch of other things. So we had people who were married, people who were not, people with kids, people whose dogs were their kids. We had volunteer firefighters, we had lawyers, we had small landowners and large landowners. We had people who were dedicated their lives to educating people about wolves. We had people who had dedicated their lives to running the best ranch that they possibly could. So we really had a huge diverse group of people. And one of the things that I learned, and I wrote these down in a recent letter that I've written, is there were 4 things about people that I've realized that I think were true as a group. One is that people are often afraid of change because it's uncertain. And they're often afraid of change because they know that change might threaten their way of life, whatever that is, on both sides of this topic. And we've all invested incredible amounts of energy into having our life reflect the values that we see. And so that's challenging. And then humans have a real difficult time trying to focus on getting it right instead of being right. And we often care quite a lot about humans, about being right. And then the last thing is that trusting people who don't think like us is really hard. And so acknowledging that up front, and Keystone spent a fair amount of time trying to make sure that the group could work together and setting some standards, having some agreed upon values, those sorts of things that were important to the group.
And Bob, you mentioned Keystone. Keystone Policy Center was the organization that was hired to actually facilitate this entire process. Renee, I have a question for you, but I want to start back to Reid. Reid, very specifically, so you mentioned that the intention right now is per 114 is to be bringing wolves to Colorado in December. How many and where?
Thanks, John. So what we're looking at is over a 3-year period of bringing in between like 30 and 50, depending on what's attainable from other states where we're going to get the animals from. So in total, so we'll start with that. Now, this all needs to be approved by the commission as well. And that's the process that we're going through. But the initial reintroduction would be probably a total of 30 to 50 animals, something like that. We anticipate and have modeled that wolves will do very well in Colorado, and they'll expand quickly. And so what we're looking at, and this was on the advice of our technical working group, is when we release wolves, they will move. And the literature shows that between 60 and 70 miles is what their average dispersal distance would be. And so when we release them here, we're going to do what's called a hard release. We're not going to do a soft release where they're going to be in pens for any amount of time like they did in Yellowstone. At the advice of all the folks on the technical group, they feel that a hard release is much better on the animals, just physically, and they'll do fine pairing up and meeting up and developing packs. So what we did is we focused obviously on the western slope per the statute. And then what we did is put a 60-mile buffer around the state. We buffered that and mapped it. And so really that gives us what we're calling the donut hole map. And if you were to look at that map, so it's west of the divide, the continental divide, and then there's that 60-mile buffer around the state. And then we did some modeling with researchers at CSU to look at best habitat. And then we put in potential conflicts with ag, and some other things in there. And then we also are going to release those animals on public lands, or if there was to be a private landowner that came forward and wanted them released on their land. So really within that donut hole, we're looking at some, I'm sorry, not public land, but state-owned land. I should be clear on that one. So it'll be state-owned land. It's not federal land. It'll be on state-owned land or on private land within that donut hole. And we have that map in our plan if folks would like to look at it as well. So that's kind of where, and then the how many is between 30 and 50 is when we get it all done.
Awesome, thank you. So Renee, I think given where you are, there's a decent chance you'll be within 100 miles or so of wolves being released, and there's a decent chance you will see some on the landscape around you before long. I'm curious if you can share a little bit about how your view of their presence changed through these personal interactions you had with others on the Stakeholder Advisory Group, the way you think about them, or the way you talk about them in the community that you're a part of.
So first, yeah, our grazing allotments are in that top reintroduction area donut. We're just south of White River National Forest there. So we're in the southern part of that donut, and then our winter range is in that southern donut. So yeah, we're definitely kind of in the area, but so I don't know, are you asking on my views on the wolf being there, how it changed, or just,
well,
I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, you all shared opinions on the whole range of things that were being considered about compensating for wolf livestock conflict, on where they were going to be released, on potential lethal control of the wolves. And so you're thinking about these issues, and if you hadn't been on the Stakeholder Advisory Group, you would have seen information from the public or maybe from your industry emails or something of that sort. But then you had all these interactions with other folks with diverse views on the Stakeholder Advisory Group. And I'm curious if you can share an example of how you're thinking about this, how you and your community might be impacted, and whether you would support different aspects of the plan. Can you share an example of something that changed, a view that changed over time?
I think it helped me. I think it helped me kind of calm down because I felt like I could be a part of it. Because, you know, I was pretty worked up about it, and mostly, honestly, it wasn't necessarily as much about the wolf as it was about this whole concept of saying that it was to be on the western slope and voted on. To me, that was a lot more contentious of an issue than even the wolf, because it just felt, as a western slope rural resident, it felt like the urban populations were mandating something on us. And whether that would have been the wolf or some sort of water issue or some other issue, that invoked a lot of feelings. And so I came into it bringing those feelings with also knowing that we're going to have challenges with the wolf, but also feeling like this is something that was kind of shoved down our throat, really. I mean, I'm just being honest. And so I think it helped me separate that a little bit so that I could really focus on, okay, what are the challenges specific to the wolves and what are we going to do? And also realizing that this is an issue we would have to deal with eventually anyway. You know, they're naturally migrating here. So it's something we'd have to deal with anyway. That also brought some other perspectives, like maybe my bear predation and my lion predation, maybe that will decrease if wolves push them out. I don't know. And none of that is scientific. There hasn't been studies that have said that. There's been actually studies that said the opposite of that with lion, but and it also gave me an opportunity to learn a lot more about what the realities are in other states, and some of those weren't good realities for me to hear as a sheep rancher. But it also kind of just gave me that firsthand look of how we're going to deal with some things. And also it was kind of a realization when everyone talks about non-lethal mitigation and what are some of the things we can do. It's like, oh gosh, we're already doing that. We're already doing that. We're already doing that. Like, we're already doing a lot of these things that people are saying are these novel conflict mitigation. And so I think that was a good realization to know that, like, as a sheep rancher, we're set up with already with a lot of those tools. And I think it was important also to help me reach out to the cattlemen in the cattle industry and be able to share our experiences with conflict mitigation with other predators with them. And I also saw like this unique kind of coming together with the cattle and sheep industry, because typically in the past, the cattle and sheep industries have there's conflict there too. So it was interesting to see them, you know, us come together and say, like, that we're all in this together, and what can we do to help each other out going forward. So I wouldn't say that I've never thought of the wolf as a bad thing, as the bad guy. I mean, the wolf is more wildlife, and I love wildlife. I love bears and lions and elk and you know, any wildlife. Would I like to see a wolf in the wild? I think it'd be really cool. But it brings challenges to my industry specifically. So there's another level of, it's cool, but there could be some conflicts and that we'll have to deal with. So I don't think my attitude on the wolf specifically changed. But my attitude on people who kind of push that ideology, that did change. Like, I was able to see, like, they have their motivations, and this is why they feel this way, and this is why they believe this way. And so that kind of helped me understand their motivations a little bit better. Well, hopefully that wasn't too all over the place.
I think that question was hard because I'm not sure the people in a stakeholder group ever felt like our job was to change each other's minds. Our job was to write a plan that could reintroduce wolves by 2023 in a way that met the conditions of the law, which included things like compensation. So of course there were difficulties reaching agreement, but seeing people as people is the way you start building some trust so that you can compromise in order to get the plan moving forward. So right now, one of the things that I struggle with is that I believe there's a lot of dialogue around issues that are important issues, but they don't necessarily need to be resolved right now before wolves can be reintroduced, because there's some mechanics that need to be done and there's conditions of the law that need to be met. And so, by way of example, after 18 straight months of listening to public comment, reading public comment, attending meetings all over the state, I mean, there's hundreds or thousands of people hours in this plan. There's two things I heard, one from each side, that are true. One is the rural community wants to be valued and respected for what they do for the world, and they want to feel like that their voice matters, even though in many cases in a vote, that vote gets overturned, their voice gets overturned. Still, they bring something to the table and they want to be heard. And then they want an easy to understand compensation plan. That makes sense. I think we could do that. And then it felt like the people who voted yes for wolves, there was a number of things. They obviously wanted wolves to be reintroduced to Colorado by the end of 2023. Of course, the federal relisting of them has made that a challenge because we had to stop and do this other federal program, which is really expensive, by the way. So it takes about a year. A SNEPA program takes about a year, costs about $1 million. So it's not insignificant. So the pro-wolf people wanted to see wolves on the ground. And then if we were honest, they were probably a little bit torqued that it took so long for it to happen, because wolves have been gone from Colorado since the 40s. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with those two things. I'm just saying that's what I heard. The thing that I struggled with, though, at the end, so that's sort of overarching. If you look at public comment now, they're falling into 4 categories. And I'm going to say most of these don't have to be solved before we can write a great plan and Colorado Parks and Wildlife can get to work. The first is the wolf advocate community doesn't think there should ever be hunting of wolves. They think that was clear in the law. Whether that's true or not, the whole political state of Colorado, the people in Colorado, the commissioners in Colorado, we will all change by the time they're delisted federally and delisted from the state. So whether you like it or not, I don't know that has to be solved before the plan gets done. So I think in some case we should focus on the plan and then a little bit of what we want. I'm going to hit the other 3 really quickly. Again, the pro-wolf community had a lot of conversation about the use of public land, grazing on public land, all of that sort of stuff. Again, I don't think that issue has to be solved before we put wolves on the ground. And then 2 other from the people who probably voted no. And again, we don't know the answers to that. But first, people in the hunter community and agricultural community sort of live by this North American model. Again, you don't have to agree with that North American model right now, but that is what Colorado Parks and Wildlife works on. And again, we don't have to solve that just yet for wolves to be. And the final was the ranching community was vocal up front that they wanted to be able to control wolves that were problematic. For a long time, the conservation community said, well, we think predation will be low. Of course, when wolves came into Colorado and started some predation problems in North Park, all that changed automatically. So there's just sort of a well-rounded view of the conversation. And I think we should focus at this stage on what do we need to approve a plan so that we can get started reintroducing wolves to Colorado. Not whether we agree on a topic.
I want to pick back up on a theme here, but real quick, there's a couple audience questions. Maybe Reid, if you could take them real quick, short answers for us to clarify a few things. And then we'll kind of come back to some of this process stuff. But how is this plan to be funded? If you could illuminate that. And then we had another audience who was curious if any private landowners had offered up land to be used for reintroducing wolves.
Yeah, thank you, Kristan. So right now, the funding we have comes from the General Assembly. The state legislature has given us around $2 million for funding of this plan. Now, with the state budget, you have to, that's not just forever and ever, you have to go back for an annual appropriation. So there's lots of discussion about that right now. We believe our funding is good for the immediate future, but as we go forward, we really need to make sure that the funding is strong there. So we have the funding we need now, but as we, like I said, go forward, we need to make sure there's continually funding. So there were lots of discussions in the process about that, and a lot of people had different ideas, but right now the plan is to stay with the General Assembly and an appropriation from them. And then the question about if anybody with private land has come forward. Not at this time have we had anybody with a private piece of property come forward. It's still an option, but right now we have not had a person come forward with that.
Thank you. John, let me jump in with one more question, and maybe I'll toss it back to you as you wrap us up. But I've heard a couple words used already in this panel that I find interesting because I love the theme of what y'all are talking about of understanding. I hear a lot of empathy. And obviously, I think words can have triggering effects for us, right? The language that we use when we have a conversation can really potentially not only alienate someone, it could determine how that conversation flows from there. So language matters. We know that. This is how we connect and learn with one another and understand what's going on in their heads. You know, it's anti-wolf, it's pro-wolf as examples. It's urban versus rural, right? We hear these dynamic and these languages playing out, not only here in this wolf issue, but obviously across the state as it relates to so many bigger issues. I'm curious if there was like a lesson or a moment when like that didn't quite go well, or you all were not connecting and learning from each other and listening and hearing, and things got shut down because perhaps language that was used that was meant to maybe alienate or to put a label on something or someone. I'm wondering if either of you have a lesson about that, of either a growth experience for yourself or something that you'd love to share with the audience about a takeaway when people think about connecting and communicating on these hard issues that bring a lot of passion to them. Open floor. I'm not going to call on one of you. I'm going to look for that raised hand.
You want to take that, Renee, or you want me to start?
Why don't you start, and then I'll add what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're getting at, but it is the sorts of epiphanies that helped me bridge the gap from unequivocally, I would like to see wolves in Colorado. Unequivocally, I think large privately held land, mostly often, I should say, owned by large ranches, is critical for winter wildlife habitat in particular. So those two things, there was Scott Fitzgerald says, the mark of true intelligence is to be able to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. So I tried to keep that there. So here's an example of where I saw things breaking down. When people came in and made public comment about ranching communities wanting to slaughter either wolves or slaughter sheep or cows that were under their husbandry care, the use of that word was very, of course, I don't know, that's hard. Like, I don't think I'm in the business. I have 1,000 animals at the zoo. I'm in the business of taking care of them. Sometimes they get old and have health problems, and we have to consider management euthanasia here. And we take that exceptionally serious. We're not talking about just, we don't want them anymore, so we're going to euthanize them. But much like you would treat a pet, like, we feel a heartfelt connection with the animals that we take care of. So I don't think slaughter really embodies that word. If you think about that on the opposite end, the United States is struggling with being more and more diverse. If you listen to public dialogue, we want that to be true. But take Renee, for example, she raises sheep. Lots of Americans don't eat sheep, but lots of ethnic groups in America do eat sheep. And so we can't say that we want to have this ethnic group, but then not provide something that's really important to their dialogue. So to their culture and to their daily food. So what was hard was slaughter and then providing food for a group who lamb is really important to them. Those are the same things. Animals are dying in there, but that's radically different dialogue. When the group, mostly the group didn't collapse to this, but when public dialogue made you choose either or, that's when we really began to struggle. I don't know if that's a good explanation of what you were asking, but that's what I saw happening.
I appreciate that perspective, Bob. I want to close us out here. We've got 6 minutes. We're going to get you all out at 1 o'clock here today. But to close us out, I'm wondering if we could sort of broaden the view a little bit to questions about navigating difficult, polarized questions overall. Colorado's continuing to grow. We hear a lot about the urban-rural divide. We know politics generally are polarized. At least that's what we read in the newspaper a lot, or read online. But one thing that really strikes me, speaking of language and words, is that just this morning I was looking back at the 2020 Conservation in the West poll. So this is a poll that's done by out of Colorado College. And that poll from 2020 showed that nearly 70% of Coloradoans call themselves a strong conservationist, and another 26% consider themselves a moderate conservationist. So almost 100% of us in Colorado consider ourselves conservationists. But so meanwhile, you know, our population's growing, we've got issues, we've got a lot of tough issues we're looking at. Land use issues, forest health and wildfire issues, water issues, which we hear about every single day. I would love to hear from each of you, including Reid, if you're able to, a lesson that you've taken away from the process of navigating wolves. One statement or one suggestion for how the rest of us think about navigating these polarizing, challenging issues as we move forward, trying to maintain the Colorado that we all love. Who wants to start us there?
I'm happy to start. I'm unmuted. I think two things came to my mind. Is that the first I remembered, and it's not easy because you pick another topic and then I would be up in arms about it as well. And this concept of when did we quit looking at people holistically as people, and yet we boiled them down to a single issue. Did you vote for wolves or did you not vote for wolves? Which was your thing? And we struggle in this country with being able to see people as a people, but then acknowledge that they might have a different opinion. And so the concept of when did a good and ethical person who disagrees with me stop becoming a good and ethical person? I don't remember when that shift happened. And then the last thing for me, and I've kept this as a North Star throughout, I'm just going to read something. It's 2 sentences. I've kept this as a North Star throughout because this is what I was trying to do when I was listening good to all sides. And it was a very clear image of what success looks like. And that is, at the end of the day, we'll know when we've done a good job because a rancher in the middle of nowhere by themselves in a truck or on their front porch with the means and ability to end a wolf's life will choose to let that wolf walk through their private property or the public grazement allotment without shooting it illegally because he or she was treated fairly enough during the process that they're willing to give this whole experience a chance to succeed. You don't have to agree with me to let that wolf walk because I heard you well enough. And that's been my North Star throughout this whole thing, because this whole thing is going to play out in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from the nearest town.
Thanks for that, Bob. I appreciate that. And Bob was really good about kind of bringing us back to that and reminding people. The public comment during our SAG meetings would derail us, and I think that some of them came in intentionally to make us feel bad, and that was unfortunate. And anyway, Bob made a statement in one that words matter, and words do matter, and we are all people trying to do the best we can here in our lives and raising our kids and respecting our own cultures. And so I think that's what we need to expect. I kind of want to just end with this concept of coexistence. The definition of coexistence is to exist together at the same time or in the same place. And so I think we need to think about that as when people talk about coexistence that aren't actually actively coexisting in the same place, it's a very different thing. When you coexist at the same time, that just means that somewhere parallel to you, this other thing exists. But when you're existing in the same place, your lives are intersecting. And so ranchers have to coexist sometimes on a daily basis with livestock. But the concept of coexistence also is a state in which two or more groups are living together while respecting their differences and resolving conflicts nonviolently, right? And so it creates this mutualism. But unfortunately, humans are the only ones that are able to make that conscious decision to not be violent. The wolves don't make that conscious decision. They're operating on their biology. And so if they become violent, it's not something that they're doing mean-spiritedly, but it's also not something that they're going to be able to curb. So it has to be all on our end. And I think what I want people to understand is that we need to look at these not from the 30,000 foot view. I mean, that's important too. We need to look at the big picture and see what are all the unintended consequences that are going to come with this, and who are the people down there at the tree level, like on the ground at ground zero, like what are they dealing with, and how are they able to resolve what's going on. And so I think the best thing that we can do is educate ourselves, open our minds and open our hearts to listening to other people and other perspectives. And we might actually learn something about, like, oh, wow, I never really thought about it that way, but now it makes sense. And so I think we have to really come outside of ourselves and be open to other people and other viewpoints so that we can respect and come up with solutions that work for everybody. And it's not going to be perfect, but we can't be so one-sided that we lose sight of the fact that there are people on the other side too that are just the best they can.
Reid, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I just, again, thank you. As a scientist, I go to the biological side of science really quickly. That's my comfort zone. But as I've learned through this stakeholder advisory group process and the public input process, that intersection of biology and then the social sciences is so vital. And as I look forward to managing wolves and working with wolves throughout the rest of my career, that's going to be so important, is that we continue to bring the social part of this and meet it with the biological side. CPW has 125 years of managing wildlife really well. We know we're going to do a good job with this, and wolves will be a success here, but it's that social component tied with the biology that will really make this a success. So I just appreciate the conversation and for everybody being on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I did too. What a great conversation. Obviously, a huge thank you on behalf of myself, on behalf of John Sanderson and his institution, to our speakers, Renee, Reid, and Bob, for being with us today, for being very direct and open and sharing your experience. It's very different. We're not in the weeds about the specific decisions. It was definitely more about the social sciences that Reid talked about and how we got here to where we are with this draft plan. So again, thank you all very much for both your work, for joining us today, and for sharing a little bit of your perspective. Hopefully our audience enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I absolutely learned something, Renee, as well. I always do in these conversations. We'll drop some links here into the chat. My colleague Nicole hasn't already done that. You can watch this video and share it with anyone who didn't get a chance to tune in with us today. It's already available on our YouTube channel because it was live streamed. So feel free to share that out. We'll send you all a follow-up email tomorrow with some specific links and resources that came out of today. Thank you all very much for joining us with your time. Hope you have a great rest of your week. And let me thank again our partner, John Sanderson, Center for Collaborative Conservation, for always being a great co-host and thought leader and bringing together a panel like this. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kristan. Thank you all. Have a great Monday.
Thank you.